Yes, your question is very typical question. You have given the example that you are from northwest part of India, so you have Punjabi and Urdu and even Balochi and maybe some words of Pashto and of course lots of words of Sanskrit or so-called Hindi in the language with which you have grown up, or so-called your mother tongue, or the language which you speak at home, the language in which you have been thinking right from your early childhood. So if that is your language, then how do you define what should be your formal language? What should be the language you should use if you go to a court, or if you go to higher education and read a book? You see, that is the fundamental question. Because for all of us, there is a language of daily use. We want to buy a pan from a panwala and we use that kind of a language. But if you are going to make a submission in a court of law, asking for a wrong to be set right, then it would have to be in some kind of a very standard language. Now, this is the essential contradiction that policymakers face, and which cultural strategists have also faced throughout Indian history. In India, people solve this problem by making Sanskrit the formal language, and it continued to be the formal language. A formal language is that language which can be used in the widest possible area and for very sophisticated communication. Something which can be used for philosophic expression, legal expression, giving philosophic ideas to children, raising them in that manner, talking about art, creating different disciplines in it, transmitting various sciences in it. Now for that you need a formal language, and India chose Sanskrit to be that. And India did another great miracle, which no other nation, or rather no other region or civilization, as a matter of fact, was able to do. And the miracle they did was they formalized Sanskrit to such an extent that they stopped a period-wise growth in it, rapid growth in it. They said, let us make it frozen language, more or less, on rules of Panini and rules of various other grammarians. So that, as a result, I can read Sanskrit written by the Vedic sages today, after 5,000 or 7,000 or 10,000, whatever people think is the age of Vedas. I can read Kalidasa, whereas people in England can't even read Shakespeare 400 years ago. You know, if I go to, let us say, the immigration officer when I land up in London, and if I say, methinks thou art shining forth like the zona, he'll say, what are you talking, you fool? And if I tell him this is how Shakespeare talked, he'll not believe me. It's just 400 years. But if somebody comes into a street of Delhi, Banaras or whatever, and it comes from the period of Kalidas and he wants to communicate in Sanskrit, then he can communicate with thousands of people today who know Sanskrit in India. So you see, that continuity or that formality has been preserved. And then Sanskrit supplied this immense wealth of words to various languages over centuries. It kept supplying to them again and again. Century after century, people started using those languages. So even when you wrote, let us say in 16th century like Tulsidas, then you used a lot of Sanskrit. Even in your Avadhi, you used Sanskrit. Sometimes pure Sanskrit words. Or you use in all Indian languages, like you are a Punjabi, and you say Parinaya gaya si, shadi ho gayi na. If somebody is married, then you say Parinaya, or what do you say? No, Vyaya gaya si, yeah, but there is Parinaya also used, I have heard it, by Punjabis for marriage. Yeah, it is, I have. Yeah, but okay, then if you say Vyaha, then that is from Sanskrit Vivaha. If you say Parinayasi, then that is from Parinay. My point is that the vocabulary of Sanskrit is constantly continuing in the largest area of India, in nearly all the languages that are used, including Tamil. This is the point I am making. So, just a minute, please. Let me complete. My answer to your question is that your language is not one language. Or for that matter, anybody's language in India is not just one language. It has to be 3 or 4 languages for different purposes. When you are at a home with your family, with your people, then you are going to use one language. When you are, let us say, in a university, you will use a slightly or a very different language. When you are in a court of law, then you would have to use another language. Now, if people understand that, then most of the problems of the language conflicts would come to an end. Now, this is the point that I am trying to make. So when somebody says, give up Urdu, now that does not mean that you should discard Persian words. But when you use a formal dialect, then you will use words in which maybe there are some Urdu words also, but they would fall in a certain pattern or in a certain amount or a certain quantity. Because when you make a formal language, you make that artificial choice. So if you look upon this diversity of usage, then you would be able to reconcile with the truth. But so long as we say my language, and we think that my language should be the language of the home, or the simple home, then we enter into conflict. Once we accept the fact that we are going to use multiple languages for multiple purposes, we'll have no problem. So if we are prepared to look out of the window of the railway train and see that, okay, now I am in this part of India and this is what would be written in that script or in 4 or 5 languages, and it is not in what I have been speaking since childhood, then it's fine. But when I say no, I want my language everywhere, then it would be a problem.